Hi, everyone. My name is Alicia Gildy. I'm a Senior Director at CalSTART, and I oversee our Clean Fuels and Infrastructure program, and I'm super excited to be here today. This is such an important forum to really focus on the importance of advancing zero-emission infrastructure, and I couldn't be more privileged to have this wonderful panel to lead. So California is truly paving the way for advancing zero-emission transportation. Through policy, incentives, and partnerships, great progress is being made to transform the way we move goods and people. However, as we work together toward a zero-emission future, it is critical that we have the necessary tools in our toolbox for success. We need to build the infrastructure that will successfully enable zero-emission trucks, buses, and equipment. Now, this is no easy feat, but the good news is that there are a lot of good learnings to be shared and guidance to help you pave the way for deploying infrastructure. Today's panel will showcase great leadership and perspectives from academia, a large retailer, a fleet user, and technology solution providers that have taken critical steps to building infrastructure for battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. They will share important considerations for infrastructure development, how they overcame barriers, and best practices for fleet deployment. We have 5 wonderful discussion leaders for this panel. And to start us off, I would love to introduce you to our first presenter, and that is Dr. Nikit Abhyankar. Dr. Abhyankar is a scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and is a senior scientist for the Center for Environmental Public Policy for the University of California, Berkeley. He also serves as a guest faculty for the Executive Education program at the University of California, Berkeley. He regularly advises on national, state governments, regulators, and utilities in multiple countries on clean energy policies and programs. Nikit, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's indeed an honor and a privilege to serve on this panel, and I'm excited to talk about zero-emission trucks. So let me quickly share my slides. So before I begin, let me quickly give you a preview of what I'm going to talk about. I'm essentially going to cover 6 important aspects about Mdv and Hdv electrification, which is particularly important in the US, but also valid in other countries. First, I'm going to talk about batteries, how the costs have fallen. Second, I'm going to show the new truck models and the new manufacturer commitments that we are seeing in the marketplace. Third, I'm going to give you some flavor of what the economics of zero-emission trucks looks like. Fourth, I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the major concerns, particularly about battery electric trucks, is about the weight and range and so on. Fifth, I'm going to touch upon the charging infrastructure requirements, and then I'm going to talk about what would be the grid impacts if an aggressive push towards electrification is forthcoming. All right, first, let's talk about the battery prices in general. So the chart shows the battery pack prices. These are the pack prices, not the cell prices. Global average pack prices, BNEF projections, projections from other studies such as National Renewable Energy Labs Electrification Future Study, and also numbers reported by certain manufacturers, Tesla, GM, and so on and so forth. You have seen this chart several times, I'm sure. But there are 3 important aspects that I really want to draw upon from this chart. Number 1 is just how rapidly the battery pack prices have fallen over the last 10, 12 years, nearly 70 to 80% reduction just in the last 10 years. Second, really unanticipated improvement in the performance of the batteries. And what I mean by that is the specific energy, the energy density, the fast charging capability, and so on and so forth. That enables longer range vehicles, that enables fast charging vehicles and fast charging infrastructure, and really changes the economics and feasibility of electric vehicles. And third is, even in the future, the costs are expected to drop pretty rapidly, continue the historic trend. And this also matches with what several other manufacturers are reporting. For example, just 4 years ago, all the experts, and that includes us, by the way, I'm not excluding myself from that group of experts, projected that the battery prices will be of the ballpark of $120, $130 per kilowatt hour by 2030. Well, guess what? Today, the average battery price has already fallen to $130 per kilowatt hour, and the Chinese LFP prices have been reported to be $100 per kilowatt hour. So all those cost reductions have really achieved 10 years earlier, and that really challenges us to rethink our decarbonization and electrification strategy going forward. And this is what we see even in the marketplace. So several major manufacturers are making zero emission commitment, battery electric trucks, as well as fuel cell trucks. Several newer models are getting introduced, and not only newer models, but also those models we see longer range, fast charging capability, and so on and so forth. All of this would not have been even foreseeable just 5 years ago. That's how rapidly technology has changed. Now, but what about the cost? Even at $130 per kilowatt hour battery price, the upfront price of an electric truck, it's still significantly higher than an equivalent diesel truck. So the chart on the right shows a typical Class 8 truck, diesel truck upfront price of about $125,000. And a 375-mile electric truck with approximately 800 kilowatt hours of battery pack. And from the bottom-up estimate using 2019-20 battery pack price numbers, we estimate the bottom-up cost to be approximately $200,000, give or take. So naturally, this is a huge increase in the upfront price. However, over the next 5 to 10 years, as battery price drops, we expect the price of electric truck to drop to approximately $150,000, give or take, over the next 5, 7, 8 years as battery price drops. And what we find is that battery pack price of $60 to $80 per kilowatt hour is that magic number where the electric truck price drops to approximately $150,000, give or take. And then that changes the economics rapidly. But what is interesting is even today, even at today's electric truck cost, our bottom-up estimate of approximately $200,000 for a 375-mile electric truck. On a total cost of ownership dollars per mile basis, electric trucks are still cheaper than diesel truck and save approximately $100,000 to $200,000 over the life of the truck relative to the diesel truck. And this is not even including any of the environmental benefits, including the greenhouse gas benefits or the local environmental benefits. So as you all are aware, nearly 15 to 20,000 people, or actually more, but at least 15 to 20,000 people die every year in the US because of vehicular air pollution. And approximately 10,000 of them are really because of the vehicular air pollution due to heavy duty trucks. And this is also a huge equity issue because most of the ones that get affected by environmental impacts come from low-income groups, frontline communities, communities of color, and so on. So this electrification or zero-emission trucks is definitely beyond just the economic benefit that it can bring in. The next question that always comes up is, what about fuel cell trucks? Definitely that is a promising technology, and we have looked at that as well. In fact, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab has a huge fuel cell program working on that. However, when we looked at the costs, and several other studies as well that have looked at the comparative economics of battery electric trucks versus the fuel cell trucks, the costs and infrastructure for fuel cell, especially hydrogen fuel cell, remains a significant challenge going forward. However, they clearly offer some range and refueling time advantage. So there is definitely more reconciliation and advanced research that still needs to happen on how to reduce the hydrogen cost, how to create efficient infrastructure on hydrogen, and so on. All right. Then the next topic is about weight, because batteries are significantly, they weigh a lot, and that's why a common criticism of electric trucks is that reduces the overall vehicle weight and that cuts into the payload that the freight trucks can carry. So we assessed how much would that weight increase be because of batteries. So typically what people tend to forget is, yes, batteries are heavy, they weigh a lot, but when you build an electric truck, you're also not accounting for the weight of engine, transmission, the drivetrain, and so on. So if we exclude that weight, add the battery weight, add the electric drivetrain weight, then what this chart shows is for a 500-mile electric truck, with the current technologies and the current battery specific energy levels, the weight is approximately 15 to 20% higher than a regular diesel truck. For lower range trucks like 300, 350, 400 mile range electric trucks, the weight parity has already been achieved. But there is significant potential for reducing the battery electric truck weight. And what we find is, just with the existing technologies that we have available for lightweighting, for changing the drag coefficient, and so on and so forth, the net weight of an electric truck could be comparable to a diesel truck in the near future. The next question is around range. For example, even if you have a 500-mile range electric truck, on certain days, long-haul trucks may have to travel for 600, 700 miles or so. But what is interesting is, instead of a full range of the truck, what really matters, of full daily distance traveled by a truck, what really matters is the distance traveled to the nearest stop. And what we have found is the average distance traveled, even by long haul trucks, to a nearest 30-minute stop is approximately 200 miles. So you always have a window for a quick 30-minute fast charge every 200 miles, even for long haul trucks. The next question is about charging infrastructure requirements. Naturally, aggressive electrification requires rapid build out of fast public charging infrastructure. And what we have assessed, if we want to electrify all new sales of trucks to be electric over the next 10 to 15 years, nearly 400 to 600,000 public charge points would need to be installed in the US. This definitely seems like a daunting number, but it's not internationally unprecedented. China built 300,000 public charge points, most of them for LDVs. So it's not an apples to apples comparison, but they still built 300,000 public charge points just in 1 year in 2020. And this charging infrastructure cost is also modest relative to what distribution utilities have already been investing so far in the standard distribution system upgrades. The next question, and this is my last slide. The next question is about the grid impact. What does it mean in terms of additional load? So truck electrification is not going to happen in a vacuum. It is going to be complemented by LDVs electrification, buildings and industrial electrification. So we assessed what would it mean if all the sectors set aggressive electrification targets. So it does add significant additional load onto the grid. By 2030, if all sectors set aggressive goals, it would add approximately 20 to 25% of additional load. By 2035, about 35 to 40% additional load. And by 2050, about 75 to 80% additional load. So significant additional load. But it is not historically unprecedented. We have achieved such level of load growth between 1970s to early 2000s, where our load nearly doubled, and we met that load growth reliably. This does need significant expansion of the renewable energy fleet, and which I'll be happy to talk about in the discussion section. So let me stop at that and just emphasize that all of this sounds great on paper, but needs significant policy and regulatory support that really addresses the high upfront costs, charging infrastructure, and electricity rates. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That was an excellent overview and a wonderful way to start our discussion today, and really appreciate all of the great wealth of knowledge and overview of the market, and then important considerations for electric and fuel cell vehicles, the costs, the benefits to communities. Just a great overview. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And folks, I just want to say, if you have questions, make sure that you're putting them in there so that when we get to our discussion portion of this panel, we want to make sure that we're addressing them the best that we can. All right, so next up, it is my pleasure, and we're now kind of turning our focus to talk about hydrogen refueling and hydrogen fuel cell fleets. And I'm pleased to bring in our next presenter, Wayne Lee, who is the commercial head of hydrogen mobility for North America for Shell Renewables and Energy Solutions. He was appointed business development manager for hydrogen mobility in 2017 and commercial head for North America in 2020, where he is developing hydrogen fuel for fuel cell electric vehicles. Wayne, wonderful to have you, and I'll turn it over to you for your overview.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and I'll be brief so we have plenty of time for discussion. At Shell and Renewables and Energy Solutions, we are developing the full range of renewable and decarbonized energy sources, systems, and fuels. I'll represent hydrogen today, but my job is to make it as good as it can be so that it competes well with those other options. We do see complementarity and coexistence of these new fuels and energy systems. I think what that means is that we'll find important customer segments across all of the vehicle classes, for example, for hydrogen mobility, but it can sometimes be a challenge for customers to then navigate what is becoming a multi-fuel kind of future. It also means that we're rather objective. As I said, hydrogen competes and therefore begins to fit into what we're developing. Another theme is a very rapid pace of progress. That means oftentimes the biggest challenge is how to get started. We can begin in hydrogen to make decisions based on trends. So building on Nikit's presentation, soon the hydrogen slide can be updated with the same kind of trends and cost reduction and performance improvement. I'll mention a few things in a second. And we start to see the kind of synergy in energy systems that is important to achieve the very deep emission reduction goals with an energy system that remains reliable, resilient, and affordable. There are some policy enablers and some policy blockers. We, together in California, can unlock some important things. Hydrogen essentially moves energy in time and space. One of the themes in charging will be how to manage the demand in time. Hydrogen can complement that by moving the energy to a different time and place into a higher value. Another theme that I'd like to touch on is the importance of wires and pipes for the energy system. And we will encounter some practicalities of the infrastructure footprint that's envisioned. A few things about Shell to conclude my opening remarks. We've worked on hydrogen as an energy carrier since the 1960s. Codes and standards and technologies. This is a strong foundation for the industry today. We've worked on it since the late 90s in a demonstration phase, the first fueling stations and the first vehicles showing that it could work well. Since about 2010 has been the pre-commercial phase for us. The vehicles are great, they're available, and the fueling stations are open. A customer can swipe the credit card and purchase hydrogen fuel. but our cost and performance has been the main focus. We have doubled the capacity of hydrogen refueling stations while halving the cost twice in the last decade or so. So a similar rate of improvement as you just saw in batteries. There have been important innovations in public policy also that have pivoted toward acceleration and scale. And we're now into a program of station development in California that's more efficient and gives more market confidence. We're just started on the first multimodal hydrogen refueling station, fueling cars, trucks, and locomotives. It can achieve diesel cost parity with full utilization. We're about to open the first 3 truck fueling stations serving drayage trucks out of the ports of LA and Long Beach. We got to 100% renewable hydrogen last year, and we'll get to zero carbon hydrogen this year. Sometimes the question is hydrogen a renewable and fuel? And it is happening and very quickly. Sometimes the sting is in the head with hydrogen infrastructure. We need to build a new infrastructure early, but the benefit is we get to build it correctly with the right policy signals. And in the gaseous hydrogen midstream, we will triple the capacity and halve the cost from the current setup, which enables reducing the cost of the hydrogen supply about 75% while decarbonizing. That establishes the next century of energy industry in California with making use of local renewable resources and local job creation. Last few themes I hope we get to touch on today. Innovation is really key from all of us. Coordination is key amongst all of us. An all of the above approach is key from all of us. And the shape of our emission reduction curves really do matter for the goals of mitigating climate change and improving human health. Thank you.
Wayne, that was excellent. And it's so exciting where the hydrogen industry is taking us. And what I think is great is really there are solutions across so many applications, and it's about finding the right one that works for you. And I'm pleased to now bring in our next speaker who can share her experience of evaluating options of zero-emission solutions and what it takes to find the right fit. And certainly it's not always easy, but certainly I would say Lauren Skyver, who is the CEO and General Manager of Sunline Transit Agency, can share a lot with us. Since 2013, she has been the CEO and General Manager of Sunline Transit Agency, where she remains excited to lead the delivery of transit services for the Coachella Valley and continue the efforts of Sunline's zero-emission bus program. Sunline has been a pioneer in hydrogen fuel cell and zero-emission technology and continues to be a leader in innovative approaches to clean transit service delivery. Lauren, great to have you. You're one of my favorite women leaders in this industry. I will hand it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Alicia. And I first want to say that, Sunline, and people are shocked by this, but Sunline is truly technology agnostic. We've ran LNG, we've run all forms of fuel cell vehicles, and we do have battery electric buses on our property in active service now. And we believe mixed propulsion and the use of mixed propulsion is something that fleet operators may need to explore in the future, just based on availability, cost, and the job that these vehicles may need to do. One of the things that is a core principle for us is we believe hydrogen will be a part of electrifying America, whether it's in fuel, it's in electricity, or in energy storage. And we've been driving several projects to help with the development of that. I think that we've heard today about the cost of infrastructure for hydrogen, and that is absolutely correct. I think the project that Sunline is doing with SoCalGas and the H2 Silver Stars may be the game changer that we've been waiting for. This unit uses 3D printing and may in fact create hydrogen from biogas for $3 a kilogram. If all of that plays out and we do see those prices, I do believe that the face of hydrogen will change and the availability for fleet operators will change as well. I think that the pathway that we've had has been successful. We've had our challenges along the way. I think that understanding utility and utility use, Sunline has made some mistakes just in understanding the power needs we not only need for our electric vehicles, but for the entire campus. We are waiting to see where the first major fleet operator has the money and the ability to large scale deploy battery electric buses. We know that we have the ability now with the award of our liquid station to deploy hydrogen fuel cell in a big way. And so even though our ICT plan was filed with a mixed propulsion, now with our liquid station, we will be focusing on fuel cell technology as our conversion under the Innovative Clean Transportation Rule. And I think that we continue to forge a pathway for others to follow. And we'll also share our mistakes, like ensuring that all the other building we're doing on our campus, we do have enough power for those types of needs. I think I would leave some of our listeners with the thought that understanding what's available is one of the most important aspects to creating a zero emission focus or a vision. Understanding all the technologies that are available today. We have not gotten the posted range for our all battery buses ever. And so I think understanding what you are buying a vehicle for, what you need it to do in reliability and service is extremely important, and understanding what others have found as the performance or reliability of that propulsion system is also key. I think that fleet operators are always willing to share what works and what doesn't work. And I think that our new pathway, which really will focus on fuel cell, will be something that will help others. And we hope that some of these technologies that we're pioneering today become those infrastructure components available to fleet operators in the future. So more to come. Excited about the SoCalGas project. Right now we make electrolytic hydrogen, which we feel is expensive, and are working on ways to green that hydrogen with solar. But I think this whole question of how we move to zero continues to have complication within it. But many things are happening. You heard from our colleagues today on things that are happening to address those issues and to make infrastructure possible for even the smallest fleet operator. And I'm also going to leave my comments there, Alicia, so we can have lots of time for questions.
Oh, that's awesome. Lauren, thank you so much. That was a great introduction to all the great work that you've been up to and your team. And I already have questions for you and Wayne ready for the discussion portion. But before we do that, turning now our direction back to electric charging, and I'm excited to bring in our next presenter and discussion leader, Vic Chow, who is the founder and CEO of Amply. Vic is the CEO of Amply Power, which deploys and operates EV chargers for fleets. The way data centers operate server blades, lots of them a time with high efficiency, low costs, and a 99.99% uptime reliability. All right, Vic founded Amply Power in 2018, and you are definitely up to a lot of great work, and we're thankful for you, Vic. Welcome, and thank you for your remarks in advance.
Thank you, Alicia, and it's terrific to be here with all of you today. We have touched hundreds of fleets all across the country by now. Everything from transit, like Lauren operates, to trucks, to deliveries and school buses and passenger fleets. And across all the different fleets that we've encountered, it always boils down to three issues when it comes to adoption. So the first issue is that unlike diesel or gasoline, which pricing goes up or down by, let's say, 20% in a year, with electric, pricing could be up or down by 400% in a single day. It's just that much more volatile of a fuel type when you consider time of use schedules, demand charges, and for fleets of any size, significant size that have multiple properties, well, you're dealing with multiple utility tariffs and multiple time of use schedules and demand charges, and it gets to be really complicated. And fuel is right after drivers when it comes to operational cost. So having certainty on what your costs are next week, next month, next year is a big deal for a fleet operator. And that's a big area that fleet operators are grappling with. Second big issue, just like Lauren indicated, across, without a single exception, every fleet that we encounter operates a fixed fuel or a fixed or mixed vehicle scenario, light, medium, heavy duty, different vehicle OEMs. And that's just how fleet organizations operate today. And so therefore, what you need to grapple with the scenario, operating system across all different hardware sets, across different utility tariffs, is a software-enabled operating system that will, interoperate all of the hardware sets. So think Microsoft operating system. Third issue is that it's not a 5-minute fuel up anymore. It's going to be several hours of dwell time, charging time. So for mission critical operations, you really need to schedule in the charging into the daily workflows. So that means enterprise software integration, back office integration, to the scheduling system, to the dispatch system, telematics integration. So those sets of features are the industry is just now grappling with and just starting to recognize is a strong need. Software automation, charging availability, reliability at the lowest energy cost. And it's a set of solutions that Amply, of course, is currently working on and helping our customers adopt. But if I take a step back and talk about, what are some of the overarching themes in electrification, it is that, unlike solar, which, is sort of the background that I'm from, solar energy storage prior to starting Amply, those are, I would consider, nice to have renewable solutions. If the solar system, if the sun is not shining, if the solar system doesn't get built on time, well, you'll just buy more power from your local utility, right? It's not going to disrupt your business. Well, with charging, once electric vehicles are adopted, it better work. The reliability and uptime of going to a gas station, filling up your car and pulling away in 5 minutes, that's pretty darn good. I mean, in terms of 99.99% availability, it's hard to beat. And for the fleets that we're talking about, both businesses, for transit agencies that operate a business with these vehicles, charging just has to work. And that's a very high level of standard that the industry is just starting to recognize the importance thereof. And only when we solve these kinds of issues will the industry adopt at scale. So, I guess I'll just leave the audience with the larger picture. By fueling with electric, the cost on average are cheaper than fossil fuel, than diesel or gasoline, but only if you do it right, only if you handle the charging correctly, and only if you do the managed scenario. We've noticed with plug chargers that we've operated enough customers by now to see the symptoms. About 5% of the time, we see that the night shift operator doesn't fully insert the plug fully. So by the morning, the buses or the trucks are not charged. And there's oftentimes a mad scramble in the morning by the morning shift driver. Hey, I got to find a replacement vehicle. That scenario cannot happen too many times before the fleet operator goes, well, this technology is too new. It's just not ready for prime time. I better go back to gasoline, or diesel, what actually works. So that's, I think, for all of us here around the table, that's exactly the scenario that we're trying to avoid. And to avoid that, it requires this thinking around reliability, robustness, lowest cost to fuel.
Great, Vic. We're going to get more into that too, because there's just so much to learn as a fleet or equipment owner is evaluating their fuel options. What are some really important considerations? And I do want to get into that a little bit more. And I think you covered some really important considerations. Well, you all have. So this is really exciting. All right. Well, to continue our conversation and around battery electric charging, I'm excited to bring in our next discussion leader, Stephen Mulk, who is the Project Implementation Manager for Zero-Emission Delivery at IKEA. Stephen Mulk is the Project Implementation Manager for the U.S. and IKEA's Zero-Emission Delivery Initiative. In this role, he is responsible for ensuring IKEA's retail U.S. fulfills its commitments to global electric vehicle 100 goals to ultimately provide zero-emission home deliveries to all of its customers by 2025. Well, Steve, we're so excited to have you, and please fill us in. How are you doing with meeting your goals? And I know that, in fact, that you're up to some great work. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Alicia. Yeah, we've started deploying zero-emission delivery vehicles in New York and LA already. And one of our biggest challenges, I guess, when entering into this was that IKEA doesn't own any of its delivery vehicles. We outsource to third-party logistics companies, and in turn, they actually don't own any of their vehicles either. They're really owned by individuals or small contract carriers, and likewise, the infrastructure isn't owned by them either, or us. So we've deployed a rental model for to provide vehicle access to the contractor drivers. And now our focus really turns to infrastructure as perhaps the kind of the gating factor for our further deployment across the United States. And I think it's important to recognize, if I had like one message to get across to this audience, is that there are many use cases, right? And that our use case is one that's maybe not talked about enough, in my opinion. And it's the this kind of distributed logistics network. The reason why people use these types of networks and they outsource to third parties is because a lot of the asset cost, both the truck cost and the infrastructure cost, has been shared by all of the other customers using these assets. And so when we look around and we try to create, whether it's create a program to get access to the trucks or create our own infrastructure, the real problem is that we're starting to create infrastructure that's kind of IKEA specific, right? So our focus, while today our focus is to implement as much infrastructure as possible, we are also thinking about the future and how to maybe be a customer in more shared infrastructure. So we're taking a holistic approach to infrastructure. So we have owned infrastructure that we're going to install on our properties, wherever we have properties. We will outsource some of that infrastructure so that we can build it as fast as possible. We are going to look into off-property charging solutions, which includes maybe partnering with our rental partner today to have rental lots where parking and charging is available, and also working with our third-party logistics companies to encourage them to install charging at their facilities, which is ultimately the goal. And we're encouraging governments and localities to provide more parking and charging. More public parking and charging for commercial vehicles. Commercial vehicle parking is already super difficult today. And so, the independent contractor driver, in order to convince them to get into an electric vehicle, they're going to need someplace to park and charge the truck, right? So not your typical kind of depot charging. In addition, we've also looked into mobile charging solutions, off-grid power solutions like powered by hydrogen, and that kind of thing, where we can put an off-grid solution to provide charging, maybe at one of our transportation providers' locations or something like this. And so we're kind of taking a shotgun approach, so to speak, to infrastructure and trying to find it wherever we can, because that's really the primary challenge that we face at this point. But yeah, I mean, I think that that's really the key. Our goal ultimately is to get zero emission delivery on the menu at our transportation providers and make sure that they have the charging facilities and things like that to provide us with zero emission delivery, so we can get back to kind of being a furniture store like we should be, right, instead of a gas station. So yes. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Alicia. We get to the discussion.
Steve, well, I love it. And, earlier, Wayne, you were bringing up, needing to be innovative, right? And finding solutions, because we are doing a lot of the first of its kind rollouts of these technologies. And because of all the great experience of you all being on the forefront, we're able to take those learnings and we're able to share them with others, and we're able to build that confidence that it can be done and give them the steps like, here's what you avoid, here's what you should do. And certainly you all have those tips to share. So maybe as we're thinking about, a toolbox and all those tools we want to put in that toolbox to support our fleets and helping them evaluate their infrastructure needs, maybe we can talk about the fuel and as we're talking about vocations, where does it make the most sense to go electric charging versus fuel cell? And I know, Lauren, from your experience, you're doing both, right? And so you could definitely give your insight on kind of what was really important into making those decisions. And then, of course, Steve, looking at this very challenging situation of around the world, taking advantage of how to deploy infrastructure to support a delivery fleet. There's definitely complications with that, but you are figuring it out. So maybe I can just pose it to the panel here to start us off as we think about the tools we want to put in our toolbox. What is important for a fleet, depending on their vocation, how they evaluate whether they go battery electric or they go hydrogen fuel cell? And who would like to start off?
Well, I'll start it off and then give it to my colleagues. I think I mentioned earlier, cost is one thing, but reliability and performance is another. And I think that we have consistent data on the range we are getting on our fuel cell buses, which is a one-to-one replacement for our current CNG. Our battery electric are not ready for prime time. So we are not getting the posted mileage on those vehicles. And I'm really not sure of anybody who is, and there are probably some fleet operators who are. And I think that cost is one thing, and we have to be very cognizant of cost and overall cost of ownership and the TCO that we get and the ROI and all the other acronyms that we can use. But I think ultimately, whether you're a fleet operator or a transit agency, picking people up at the curb or delivering packages is absolutely what we have to do as a core business. And so I think it will come down to range. I think range is a bigger discussion than maybe on the battery electric side is really being talked about. And I think that changing habits based on range will be a lot harder than it seems, even if a vehicle has a 200-mile range. Changing human habits about how that vehicle is operated and how goods and services are moved across the country is a whole nother animal.
Yeah, I would agree with what Lauren said. I think it does come down to range. In the home delivery space, most of our routes are 80 miles or less, and so range is not as big of a factor, and the technology exists today, and so there's a cost advantage for battery electric. If you need the range, though, Lauren's right. The hydrogen is probably the better way to go.
Yeah, I would offer a slightly different perspective. Sorry, Wayne. So slightly different perspective on this. So all of us, including some of the industry leaders, as well as including scientists and academics, we tend to underestimate how fast the technology improves and technology changes. And we have seen that over the last 5 or 10 years. So just the way and just the speed at which the battery technology is really improving, what I would advise is taking a 15 to 20 year stock, because those are the infrastructure investments you are really going to make, and then looking at a 15 to 20 year total cost, and that might give you a slightly different picture. But generally, at the present state of technology, I wouldn't disagree.
And Wayne here, maybe I'll just add a couple things from the infrastructure perspective. We, of course, listen very closely to customers to try to understand operations and duty cycles and therefore fueling needs. I think public policy is also an important customer. voice of the social good that we're all trying to achieve, we often find that it's important to translate from the vehicle class. Usually the question is phrased in terms of light, medium, heavy-duty vehicles, to the use case starts to sound like high output, high utilization for a fuel cell. A forklift is high output utilization. An Uber driver is high output utilization. And then we can start to translate into customer segment. For a particular segment of commercial fleet operations, like Steve talked about, a distributed transportation network kind of service, needing fueling network coverage, or a point-to-point long-haul fixed route, bus routes, et cetera. And the final step is then to the business case. And I think Lauren did a nice job of saying there are some things like reliability and performance that are critically important. One other one I would add is the facility constraints. The facilities manager becomes an important stakeholder for us as we understand how to fuel the first tens of trucks at the Port of Long Beach, but with an eye toward how are the 17,000 trucks going to fuel, and where do they domicile? Where do they park at night? These become important for the long-term view. Thank you.
I'm biased because I don't deal in hydrogen. I only deal with the electric, but I will just point out that the laptop I'm using to do this Zoom call, 10 years ago, it would have died after an hour without being plugged in. But the one that I'm using today, I could almost go a full day without having it plugged in, and it would just last through Zoom calls, through everything that I do during the workday. So I think that's Nikit's point, really, is that the technological advances in battery technology is going at a pretty significant rate.
Great. Well, thank you all to your good responses to that question. Building on that kind of toolbox, and what we want to put in it is partnerships. We can do what we do without the partners that are around our table that help move these projects forward. And I think, for fleets that are evaluating opportunities to advance zero-emission solutions, kind of understanding who needs to be at that table to support them with their planning, to support them with their financing, their funding, and to understand what it's going to maintain and operate these vehicles and infrastructure that would be supporting those vehicles. Maybe I can open it up to you all to talk about the meaning of partnership and who needs to be at the table, who should folks make sure that they're interacting with as they're starting their planning for infrastructure development.
Well, I'll go first on electric. So definitely the utility. So in every single one of our projects right now, deploying infrastructure, it involves a utility service upgrade, and that depending on the territory, that could be a 3-month process, or it could be a 3-year plus process. It depends entirely on where the work is being done. One of the things that we're advocating for in the marketplace right now is standardization on service upgrade requests across utilities. Just similar to how the solar industry got interconnection pretty much buttoned up and plain vanilla, rooftop solar, that is. I think we need to drive the same outcome for service upgrade at utilities. So that's one of the, answering your question, that's a partnership level, discussion that we have to engage first and foremost. But outside of that, it's spending a lot of time with our fleet customers, making sure that their needs are met, their schedule, their routes, the charging windows that we're allowed to charge or not allowed to charge, addressing their needs so that they can have an experience that's, hopefully better than diesel or gasoline. So I'll pause there. I'm sure others will have a lot more inputs on this point.
Alicia, if I can I think Vic made a really good point a couple times that we need to highlight. And I think it is a lot of work has been done in utilities, but we're not there yet. Fleet operators buy fuel sometimes in 4-year contracts where there is a very stable price. It's fuel. Electricity is sold as energy, not as fuel. And until utilities start to see that as fuel and pricing and the way that fleet operators can access electricity becomes that way, I think it's going to be a difficult road for all battery electric on the big size fleet side of the house. The second thing I would just say, as a person in a human business, I deliver people, not packages. The operator has a lot to do with the performance of an all battery electric vehicle. And so when we talk about who needs to be at the table, sometimes we forget about the folks that are actually operating that vehicle on the road and how integral they are to the performance of that vehicle. And so I would say making sure that your workforce, along with decision makers, are a part of making the decision about OEM, about platform, about propulsion is really important to a successful program.
It's Wayne. I'll chime in just to draw a contrast here. With hydrogen fueling, the time of day when the fueling occurs doesn't matter, and the throughput is very infrastructure dense. We refuel vehicles very quickly. We can put a lot of vehicles through a given hydrogen refueling station. One of the implications for your question then is the consortium can be broader. This is generally publicly accessible infrastructure, and so the aggregation of demand is an opportunity. A particular demand profile for a fleet might complement another fleet and might complement private vehicle owners doing their fueling. So in fact, the size of the tent may become quite big. It's kind of the contrast to the message on carefully managing charging. Greenlots is a great company that's doing that for us. Hydrogen on the other side doesn't need such management. It needs a broad base of all kinds of customers.
Yeah, I would also chime in. This is a great question, Alicia, because there's so many partnerships that you have to deal with. It's the drivers, it's the utilities, it's our third-party logistics carriers, right? It's our EVSE suppliers. In our case, it's also our rental company and the vehicles that they're supplying to us, the OEMs that are working to maximize the charging and range and things like this. It's all of those, but internally for us, it's also we have to manage our goods flow because the vehicles are kind of tethered to this infrastructure and they have relatively short ranges. And our stores, our furniture stores, they're not always set up to do large scale outbound distribution. And so in some cases, we're modifying our stores to do more outbound distribution, which comes at a huge effort to kind of reroute our goods flow away from third-party warehouses without charging infrastructure to stores where we're going to now install charging infrastructure, right? So I have to work with a number of people externally, all those suppliers and utilities and such, and also internally to make sure that when we put infrastructure in the ground, that we're planning our goods flow in a way that complements that.
Right. I mean, I agree with most of what has already been said. Just one additional point that I would add, and which is what Wayne also kind of alluded to, is how can different fleets and multiple vehicles share the charging or other infrastructure? And that is the only way to increase the utilization and reduce the overall charging costs. Because this is all fixed costs. The more you use it, the lower your per mile cost or per vehicle cost is going to be.
Great. You guys are wonderful. Thank you so much. And I just want to say we're getting good questions coming in from the audience. And what I'm trying to do is mold them into a question that I can ask all of you. So I've been getting really great questions, and I want to thank everyone for participating and then sending them our way. The other question I want to kind of ask the group, and I think that this is really critical, is as we're thinking about advancing, and in California, we're very fortunate where we have a lot of investments to support and incentivize the adoption of zero-emission vehicles and infrastructure. Cost is a big component to decision making on what technology is going to be best. And I know you all have a lot of experience in terms of evaluating costs and making the business case for zero emission transportation technology, and as that relates to infrastructure. So maybe you can share with me, how are you funding your projects? I mean, how do we fund that funding gap? And we know that incentives play a very important role. The more that we can really advance and commercialize these technologies, hopefully we can start seeing those price points come down. But we know we have to, incentives really do help move the market. But what other ways can we be supporting to fill that funding gap? I would love to kind of open that up to you all, because I know that that's a very important point of discussion. And I know that there are a lot of viewers listening in saying, how am I going to pay for this? So let me just open it there and see who's ready to chomp on that one.
I'm happy to go first. I've been dealing with a lot of this with our customers so far. So in California, one of the primary ways is LCFS, and that has been really a terrific program for electrification, and it's very well designed as well. So not only is it encouraging electrification, but it's also encouraging renewable energy adoption. So for example, on a lot of our projects, we deploy solar at the same time. We're already doing a construction project, let's add solar to it as well at the same time. Why? Well, it's because you can get a higher LCFS, zero carbon intensity pathway, and you get a bump in the LCFS credits. And so it's very well designed. And I think, Oregon, Washington, New York are rapidly catching up and adopting that exact framework. But answering your question, Alicia, what we find is that in California, pretty much every single customer that we have touched, we can arrive at an infrastructure cost that is less than their current cost of fossil fuel, with nothing else but LCFS. It's already there. And I wish that was the case across other states, because that would only mean that we can go faster, meaning that, the availability of LCFS.
I mean, for us, it does come at a cost. To be honest, we are supporting the rental program to try to get the drivers the lowest rates possible to get access to the electric vehicles. We are installing our own infrastructure, and so it does. It does increase the cost, the overall cost of delivery by a little. Not a lot, but we're trying to do it as efficiently as possible. But it does come as a cost. And since we are, our goal is to try to provide zero emission delivery to all of our customers. While we're, it's great that we have LCFS in, like Vic said, in California and Oregon, and soon to be Washington. That's not really a factor in our thinking when we're deploying across the U.S.
I think I'll just add one last thing. I think when fleet operators are looking at a zero emission option for their own fleet, looking at how they can make that have a public side to it only increases the network for renewable energy, or fuel cell, hydrogen, whatever it is that you're creating. So, Sunline has been selling CNG forever. When we built our station, people thought we were nuts. And we've been selling CNG for 28 years. We plan to do the same with hydrogen and with electricity at some point. And so I think that doesn't just broaden the availability for Sunline, it broadens the availability for trucks traveling along I-10 to the LA basin to now have a place to fuel. And so I think if fleet operators can, and there are programs to apply for, can look at this public side, they could all of a sudden create a hub within a network that they didn't even know was possible by their own upgrades. And so I think that's becoming more of a notion that's being explored by fleet operators, whether they're public transit or private fleet owners.
Right, and in addition to the upfront incentives and LCFS, any kind of some level of regulatory support or policy support on managing the electricity costs again makes a huge difference. It could be a direct access with a standard contract for differences contract with the renewable energy operator, or any other access to low cost electricity. Would go a long way.
Great. Thank you so much. That was great, you guys. Really appreciate all that good input. I guess the other component, and we have some really good questions coming in that are kind of specific to a few of you. So I'll get to those, but I have one more that I think each of you can answer, and that is, what helped you? Like, what guidance, what tool, is there something that helped you evaluate kind of your infrastructure planning needs, your technology needs? What type of tools and resources have you leveraged to help you, or that you might offer to support your customers with to help them with planning?
It's Wayne here at Shell. I'll start. As I said, we're developing the full range of fuels. So sometimes we do road mapping exercises with major customers, sit down and really understand their business, their operations, the different duty cycles, the different vehicle classes, et cetera, and then start to connect those dots and say, for this portion, one approach works best, and for another portion, another approach works better. And then we can figure out the overall development plan and get started. So give me a call if that resonates with you. For us also, a lot of the progress that we're making in hydrogen is in collaboration. I like to use the Boeing example of the Boeing Dreamliner. They essentially said, we think an all composite aircraft would perform very well, but in order to do that, we'd have to have certain new widgets and performance. We've done that several times in hydrogen equipment, gone out to the supplier community and said, we think this is going to perform really well, but we're going to need to do A, B, and C. And oftentimes the initial response is, well, I have A, but I don't think B exists. And we start collaborating from there and figure it out.
I'll go next. So in the electrification world, I think the term that's used these days is blueprinting. So we do a lot of that with our customers. Kind of what Wayne alluded to, from soup to nuts. Not only starting from brown dirt, and how do you lay out this charging facility? How do you design it so that the vehicles flow optimally? With buses, I mean, just because it's fresh in my mind, I'm dealing with a lot of bus projects right now. These are large vehicles, so it's not going to work if you have a bus parked in front of another, and the bus that's parked behind needs to peel out with the bus in the front that's currently not charged and can't move. So you got to consider these kinds of things when you design a facility from the grounds up on electric. So we go through these kinds of exercises. We are building a set of tools also for the lighter duty and medium duty segments. So not so beefy of an infrastructure. In those cases, we have a specific fleet designer tool that we're going to be launching later on this fall to go through this blueprint exercise in a much more expeditious fashion. But on heavy duty, on transit projects, we go through a pretty detailed level blueprinting exercise with our customers.
I would just add, as much as you have great contractors or people who bring you technology, I know my agency couldn't be where they were if we didn't have internal folks that have been empowered and are excited about what we're doing and understand the technology. Getting into a position where you've hired a specific propulsion system infrastructure provider and not knowing it yourself can be a difficult partnership, because not everything's going to go perfect. And so what we've always made sure is that with our contractors, we're on the ground understanding the ins and outs of whether it's fueling infrastructure or the vehicles, so that we can truly be partners. We can truly work with our technical teams to solve problems and not just pick up the phone and say, this doesn't work, come and get it. And I think that sometimes we feel we're too busy. And there are tons of internal champions in your organization that would love to work on something zero emission, who have a deep feeling for the environment or something new, or love a challenge or love science. And I think sometimes we don't look for that talent and don't unleash them on some of these new things that we're doing, where they can be an internal champion for the organization and really help solve problems that aren't just a call to your contractor every time there's an issue.
Yep. And I would say, I mean, Lauren is absolutely right. And the more people that are supporting your project, the easier it is. Wayne, to Wayne's point, you have to understand all of these, what you're looking for. You have to understand the technology and your duty cycle and your specific needs and use cases, and talk to people in a collaborative way, because it does kind of take a village. So all of those things are absolutely true. I would parrot what they were saying.
Oh, you all are just inspirational people. Thank you so much. That's really, really thoughtful and good feedback, and good guidance on who to tap, and how to build those internal champions to support the project. That's really wonderful. Just another question that I think is really important. And in California, and as we're looking to advance zero emission vehicles, that's not always easier for your smaller fleets, your smaller companies. And they may be looking at this tide coming their way of zero emission technology, and how are they going to be able to do it? So I wanted to kind of get your perspective on how do we help support and enable the transition of our smaller fleets to go zero emission. And especially as we're thinking about infrastructure needs, we're thinking about the importance of corridor charging, for example. Would love to get your perspectives on that, because I think that's a really important topic for California, since we do have a lot of small, independent owner operators that operate vehicles throughout the state, and they're looking at this and like, how can I do this? So your perspective on how we can help enable and support small fleets.
Oh my gosh, this is like the we can have a whole discussion just on this, because we've been, like I said, we work with independent contractors and contract carriers and small fleets all the time, and the fact is that most commercial vehicles are owned by small fleets, right? So, and not like large depots and things like this, which I think get a lot of the focus. But yeah, what small fleets need? They need financing options on how to get into these vehicles. They need residual value support, so they can find financing options that are somewhat reasonable. They need they need places to park a commercial truck. You can't find parking today for a commercial truck, much less charging. They need charging infrastructure, which is the same kind of problem that you have in like a multi-tenant dwelling type of situation, where people are, don't have the ability to have access to parking and charging. They need to be able to, there needs to be, demonstrable demand from their customers, right? Because the only way small fleets are going to get into an electric vehicle is in response to their own customers. And so there can't just be one customer, right? It has to be multiple customers and this kind of push towards electrification. They need to have, ubiquitous public charging options in the field, in the wild, so they can, access that, whether they're at one customer location or another, and not be kind of tethered to a single route. Those are the types of things. I mean, obviously TCO and stuff like this, that's super important, but I think that, even if vehicle pricing and stuff like this were different than diesel, if there was enough support for it, if there were zero emission zones that were mandated, zero emission vehicles and things like this, that would kind of force demand in that direction. But yeah, that's what they need. They need demand, they need financing, they need a place to park the truck.
Yeah, and just to add to that, though, I mean, I cannot agree more with all that Steve has already said. And just to give you an example of the scale, so for example, if you look at the current federal tax credit for passenger cars, it's approximately $100 per kilowatt hour of a battery pack. A typical commercial vehicle would have a battery pack of 300-400 kilowatt hours, or maybe larger for long haul trucks. So with $100 per kilowatt hour, I mean, what is the financial incentive we're talking about? So just to give you a scale of things, it's really important to address that upfront cost barrier right in the depth. That's number one. And number two, charging infrastructure, fast charging infrastructure, batteries that are capable of fast charging and that also offer competitive electricity rates is equally important.
And can I build on, yeah, Steve summarized it so well. I won't reiterate. I'll just re-emphasize the importance of a customer, a customer who's delighted to receive their IKEA couch, a customer who's delighted that their goods were moved zero emission, and sometimes that customer is a public policy tool. On the hydrogen fueling infrastructure side, it starts to look quite normal, actually. That it's about network planning, getting the initial fueling network with a lot of good coverage, fueling on the major corridors that will serve a lot of those smaller fleets, so that without any sort of planned infrastructure, they start to see infrastructure that is convenient and available. The beauty of the hydrogen fueling stations, again, is that they scale quite nicely. So we're building one in Sacramento now that would fuel 100 trucks, but it can grow as more trucks come on the road. And then the role of public policy is also quite familiar. The basic disadvantage is moving first, and the basic challenge is the low initial utilization. Build a fueling station for hundreds and thousands of trucks, but on day one there's tens of trucks, and there's a good role for public policy.
I would just, again, so I think we all think Stephen really did a great job of answering, but I think sometimes prioritizing the small operator with funding would be, so I use the example, like even in transit, there's more smalls than bigs in the world of transit operators. And I think for fleet operations, it's probably about the same. And I don't have data to support that. So if you take a huge operator and give them 10 vehicles or the funding for 10, it makes a difference. If a fleet operator has 10 in their entire fleet and now their company is zero, it's a huge difference as well. And I think prioritizing that in some way with funding that's available in the state or funding that's available to help those smaller operators get access. A lot of times it's navigating the access. Not even understanding how you can apply for something, I think, is one of the biggest problems for small operators. Is where do they go to put an application in for funding? I think is a place where funders could really help make a big difference for smaller companies.
One word, or maybe two words: software automation. So that's how we improve the process workflow for reaching out to the small and medium-sized fleets.
Awesome. My goodness, you guys are wonderful. You are each truly paving the way to success. And I think you've shared so many wonderful learnings. And if we could capture this in a book, I think everybody would want a copy. Thank you so much, everyone, for just your thoughtfulness, for just your remarks and sharing all of your experience and wisdom and your leadership with us. I'm sure you're going to have a number of people wanting to connect with you on LinkedIn and follow up to gain partnership with you. Certainly, I feel privileged that I get to work with you. So thank you so much for all your great work, everyone. And that has been quite a discussion discussing infrastructure and how we can truly pave the way, how we can address challenges, how we can address costs and the partners that will help make it happen. And you guys are the partners. So thank you so much. And I think with that, we are going to conclude this panel, and we're going to turn it over to another great leader in our field, Ben d'Alba, who is the advisor to Commissioner Patty Monahan for the California Energy Commission. And Ben, I'll turn it over to you to give a summary of the day and what were all the great takeaways from today's forum.